and welcome back to another episode of Retro Raw Reviews. Co-host of Ring Post Daily, Awesome One Joey here, and this episode of Raw was also in New York City at the Manhattan Center, January 18th, 1993, one day after I was born. So we're going to get right into the very second episode of Monday Night Raw. So to kick off the very second episode of Monday Night Raw, we start off with Vince McMahon, Randy Savage, and Rob Bartlett, all three, the announcers, introducing us to the show. And before we can even get started, Repo Man attacks Macho Man Randy Savage to kick off Raw. And I want to give that the very first up. Because like I have here in my notes, Repo Man attacking Randy Savage just adds to the unpredictableness that you're going to see on Monday nights. Maybe you'll see Raw start off normal. Maybe you'll see something kick off the show. And this was a good way of doing it, showing the unpredictableness of Monday Night Raw. So Repo Man attacking Macho Man gets it up from me. So we move on to the very first match of the night. And Mr. Perfect takes on terrific Terry Taylor. Now, this match gets an up from me because Mr. Perfect versus Terry Taylor went on for about 10 minutes, and it was a great way to start off an episode of Raw. And also, during that match, Ric Flair came out and intensified the feud that they were having at that time. So, Mr. Perfect was trying to, keep his eye on his opponent, but deal with Ric Flair at ringside. Mr. Perfect still pulls off the victory, and I have to give this whole match an up because not only did Flair come out and, like I said, intensify the feud while the match was going, but we still got a decent match out of it. So Mr. Perfect and Terry Taylor get it up. Now, another part that gets an up from the first match was also during the match. Bobby Heenan calls in, does a good job continuing the Flair Perfect feud, talking a little smack with Rob Bartlett, and just talking about the feud that him and that Flair and Perfect was having at the time. Like, for a person at home watching, you're watching a great match between Perfect and Terry Taylor, but then you're also getting some what you feel like is inside scoops. You're getting to see a little bit of what the fans ain't seeing there because they can't hear the commentary. They might not be able to hear the phone call coming in from Bobby Heenan. So it gives a little bit extra to the crowd, at home, that is. The people at home get a little bit of extra. Yeah, you couldn't be here in the arena to enjoy the show live, but you can get to hear the things that they're not. And that's the commentary, that's the facts that they're speaking, the story they're selling, and even the thing where Bobby Heenan calls in and just adds more fuel to the fire. So Bobby Heenan calling in and keeping the feud going gets enough. So after this segment and match, and we come back from commercial break, Vince McMahon interviews Bret Hart, pumping up his title match with Razor Ramon at the Royal Rumble for the WWE title. And I have to give this an up as well because Bret Hart, the week prior, didn't get to speak his mind. It was Razor Ramon coming out and getting interviewed by Vince McMahon. The challenger spoke his mind, said what was on his mind. And then Bret Hart comes out the next week and does the same thing, but from a champion standpoint. So I give that an up for, 1 week you hear the challenger, the next week you hear the champion, and then right before the Rumble, 2 weeks on Raw, you got 2 segments on 2 different episodes. Bret coming out and letting Razor know, like, hey, you did this to my brother Owen, you said this about my family and about me. Well, Bret coming out and speaking his mind from a champion standpoint and being able to say his final words before their match gets an up from me. So the next thing we get from on this episode of Raw is match 2, which is Marty Jannetty versus Glenn Ruth, which would later be known as Thrasher from the Headbangers. Now, I have to give this match a down because during this match, Marty Jannetty and Glenn just put on, an alright, decent match at best. It wasn't nothing to write home about. It wasn't nothing to call your friends and say, hey, you gotta get on your TV and put it on Raw. Glenn Ruth is facing Marty Jannetty. This was years after the Rockers broke up, and Shawn Michaels was already the sexy boy, becoming his own person. So Marty Jannetty being on his own here, it never really set right with me. I didn't really get the it factor out of him. And Glenn Ruth being a green guy at this time, not finding his footing, not finding his spot on the roster. Like I said, an alright match for me, but it's still a down for me. Now, the part that I will give it up is because Shawn Michaels calls in and heats up his feud with Marty Jannetty, talking crap about him, saying, well, Sensational Sherry's going to be in my corner. If she was smart, she'd choose HBK, the sexy boy, you know? So Shawn Michaels calling in and talking with Vince McMahon and the commentary team, that was more entertaining than the match itself. So I have to give Shawn Michaels calling in an up, and I have to give the match itself a down. Now, a thing I will give an up to is Reaper Man continued to mess with Randy Savage. So during the show, beginning and then even during the show, you know, we saw Reaper Man outside talking crap about Macho Man wearing his hat and just really aggravating Macho Man to the point where Macho Man couldn't even sit down in his commentary seat. So for everyone at home getting to hear this conversation back and forth, it was a nice way to kill some time. And, you know, at least they didn't just start the show off with Reaper Man and Macho Man drama and not finish that drama. So it was a nice little segment, a nice little time filler, and you got to see this little feud between them off and on during the show, which is called progressing the feud. It was progress. So I give Reaper Man messing with Macho Man and making him even angrier, I give it an up. And the ups don't stop there, because we have another up to give, and that up is the last up of the episode. But we go to Mean Gene Okerlund, and he's selling the Rumble, so to speak. He's telling you about the entrance in the Rumble, and he lists off a few of the people we heard the week before. But then he lists off about 6 to 7 more names, I believe, of people who's going to be in there. The Berserker, this guy, that guy. So it was a good way to, you know, if last week's 22 people we announced didn't get you fired up, here's a few more that you might be a fan of that will get you fired up. And I think that was pretty cool, because the week before, you know, 22 guys who's going to be in it. This week, now you know, 26, 28 guys that's going to be in it. So I give that an up for selling the Rumble as much as possible and using the TV time to promote the Rumble. Yes, you could have put commercials on TV. Yes, you could have made ads for newspapers and stuff at that time. But this is where they took advantage of having Monday night primetime slot on television on the USA Network. And even if you just flipped the channel and you came across Mean Gene talking and you stopped, even if that was the only segment you saw, them announcing more competitors for the Rumble and telling you what matches are going to happen at the Rumble, it just makes you think, oh, well, I might want to buy this pay-per-view. It's starting to look good. So even if that's the only segment you saw, at least they're pumping that pay-per-view up. At least they're trying to get more buyers. This was like them using the best of their TV time as possible, and it gets an up from me. Then we move on to the main event, which is Tito Santana faces Ric Flair. Now, this was a decent match. It wasn't, like I said earlier about other matches, it wasn't the best, but it was a decent main event. And the match itself isn't even why it's getting an up from me, but it gets an up from me because Mr. Perfect comes out and he just pulls Ric Flair out of the ring. They start brawling back and forth. The match ends in no contest, and the fans were on their feet cheering, going crazy, and the fight literally goes from ringside to behind the curtain. And then it takes another it takes another swerve because we come back from commercial. We're hoping to hear from Ric Flair, but they come right back out through the curtain. They come right back out through the curtain, and they're still fighting. Security and referees break them up, and they hold Mr. Perfect off. And another part that gets an up for me for this is Ric Flair comes out and cuts a great promo. I mean, he is mad, he is angry, he wants Mr. Perfect, you know, he wants to take him out, he wants to end his career, so much to the point that right before the end of the show, Ric Flair gets on the microphone with McMahon and says, I want to challenge Mr. Perfect to a loser leaves WWE next week on Raw. And Perfect comes out and accepts it. So on the very third episode of Raw, we're going to get a loser leaves WWE match. And what a great way to end a WWE Raw episode. And this was like one of the first times we've seen millions of times. Not all WWE programming ends with a 1-2-3 or a submission. A lot of matches, they end in no contest. And this was the beginning of that trait. This was the first main event on Raw that ended in no contest. But they did it in such a good way, it gets an up. Now the reason this very last segment gets a down is because Repo Man ends Raw by stealing Rob Bartlett's car. Now, Rob Bartlett, who's a comedian and an actor, he was on Raw as a commentator for a short period of time. His commentary wasn't terrible. I mean, we've seen worse. But the reason this gets a down is because the Ric Flair Mr. Perfect thing, that should have ended Raw right there. If you would have went off Raw right there, you had a great ending. But we end it with Repo Man stealing Macho Man's car. Now, I believe during that 45-minute, hour of TV time they had, you could have done that before the Flair match and then had the Flair match end. But it was just a lousy way to end. You had such a good ending there with Flair and Perfect. And then you have to do this little segment with Repo Man. And, you know, from beginning, middle, and end, I don't think Repo Man and Macho Man was that big of a story to start and be in the middle and the end segment of Raw. So I'm not giving the segment a down for what it was. I'm giving it a down because of where it was placed. It should have been held before the Flair and Perfect match, not the ending. Well, thanks for watching another episode of Retro Raw Reviews. Check out Ring Post Daily on Facebook. Like and subscribe to the channel. Share the videos. Let's get something popping here. And I hope that you guys have a good day and happy wrestling.